Lovely. Good afternoon and welcome, fellow councillors, officers and members of the public to this South Kesteven Planning Committee meeting on Monday the 27th of September 2021. I've not been made aware of any fire alarm tests that will be taking place today, so if the alarm sounds, please vacate the building by the stairs. Everyone, please ensure that all mobile phones are turned off or turned down. Thank you, Councillor Dilks. Today's planning meeting is slightly different as there are no planning applications taking place. This meeting is to discuss the Kratos report. We have with us today Nicola McCoy-Brown, Director of Growth and Culture, Ken Lyon, Assistant Chief Executive, Emma Whitaker, our Assistant Director of Planning, Nick Robbins, our Cabinet Member, and William C., our Project Lead. And we will go for the register of attendance and apologies, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Robert Reid and Councillor David Bellamy. I'll now do a register of attendance. Chairman Helen Crawford.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Councillor Mrs. Judy Smith.
Present, thank you.
Councillor David Bellamy. Councillor Harish Bisnal Singh.
Present.
Councillor Phil Dilks.
Mom.
Councillor Mrs. Rosemary Caby Brown.
Present.
Councillor Penny Milnes. Councillor Charmaine Morgan. Councillor Penny Robbins.
Present.
Councillor Ian Selby.
Good afternoon. Present.
Councillor Jackie Smith.
Present.
Councillor Judy Stevens.
Councillor Judy Stevens will be attending but will be slightly late. Thank you. Okay then, so item 2, consultation on suggested...
Sorry, Chair. Can it also be recorded that Councillor Baxter is here and Councillor Wood and Councillor Adams? I don't know if there's any more. And also, just to let you know that although this is supposedly a public meeting, the doors are locked and I don't think it's advertised on the display of public meetings calendar, nor is anything else for that matter on the front of the council building.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter, and duly noted. Councillor Milnes.
Yes, I was going to ask the question, how have the public been informed of this meeting, please?
As far as I was aware, it was published on the website, but perhaps somebody can confirm that, Graham. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, confirm that the agendas and all the papers associated with this meeting have all been published as usual on the council's website.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
It answers it. I'm not quite sure it's an adequate advice to the public who aren't always browsing our website to know what's going on. I mean, normally for a planning meeting, people know there's an application, they know this and that, don't they? And they think this has come out the blue and it's quite different. And I don't think anybody knows about it.
Well, the general public are generally lay people. They do attend because they want their planning application to go through or not through, as it may turn out. But this is for us. The public can see it. They can make their comments. They're watching it live through YouTube. They've had the opportunity, if they wish to, scan for the committee meeting. So I think they've had plenty of opportunity. Thank you. Councillor Dilks.
Yeah, but they can't get in the front door.
I'm sure if there was somebody banging on there, somebody would let them in. Thank you.
We'll keep our ears open. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wondered if it's the first time I've attended a meeting that's been flagged as an informal meeting, and whilst I may welcome that, I just wondered if we could get an explanation as to what that is, what it means, and you know what the implications are for. Is this a new thing that we're sort of going for. I welcome the fact that I think, is it being broadcast and it's going to be on YouTube in the normal way, but why is it informal? Thank you.
I will pass you over to the person who knows. That'll be Graham Watts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the functions of this committee are very specific, as set out in the Constitution, in relation to the consideration of planning applications. So there are only specific things that this committee can do as part of a formal meeting. So the decision was taken to hold this as an informal meeting, but hold it in public, so that the committee had the opportunity to consider the report before you, but ensure that the members of the public can observe the meeting as well.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you.
Councillor Woods.
If I could just clarify, obviously I'm not a member of this committee, and neither is Councillor Baxter or what's our purpose? Can we actually speak, or are we going to be allowed to speak with it being informal, or can we take part as normal members? Or
You can take part because you are substitute members of the planning committee, so I'm quite happy for you to make comments. Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, that doesn't apply to me. I am not a substitute member.
Well, you are a member of the council, so I'm quite happy for you to make comments.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Right. Thank you very much. Right. Oh, sorry, Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, thank you. It's just to announce I've arrived. So apologies.
I had noted, I had seen you.
I had to go
Bless
to
you.
the vet first. Sorry.
Thank you. Right. Yes, Councillor Stevens has arrived. Thank you. We will go to item 2, consultation on the suggested amendments of planning protocols. And I'll go to Councillor Nick Robbins, our cabinet member, and he will tell us more. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Delivering high quality and sustainable growth is this council's key priority in our corporate plan as set out for 2020 to 2023. Having a planning system that's highly effective is vitally important part of achieving this ambition, with officers and members working together to provide the best outcomes for our district. Therefore, the council are committed to a planning review, a top-to-tail review to identify and build upon strengths and to address areas which could be improved. The actions broadly split into 2. Firstly, officer-led improvements, and these are largely complete. Secondly, the operation of the planning committee, which is the focus of this session today. The suggested protocols and processes have been developed with the support of Kratos and input from members and officers. Today is not a decision-making session. Instead, it presents the opportunity to consult with members of the planning committee before it's presented to Constitution Committee in October and November. Ultimately, the council will consider recommendations for adoption. We feel that these protocols will help us achieve the most effective member to officer working, which is something I'm really passionate about. I'll hand over to Ken and Nicola to give a full overview of the suggestions shortly, but briefly, some of the highlights of the document in Annex 1 of your agenda pack, and these are guidelines to ensure the valuable time and expertise of the committee is best used, and that the right applications are presented and discussed by the committee. The second one, protocols including items of conduct for committee members and officers have been outlined, providing clarity around communication and roles. And thirdly, the building of the protocols that govern site visits to protect members with a consistent and transparent approach. Site visits will extend to a regular 6-monthly review of implemented decisions. And finally, a series of briefings during the pre-application process, giving members and officers time to interact during the determination. This will bring the service together and ensure members and officers can work together. We feel that these protocols are a key step in delivering high quality and sustainable growth that our district deserves. I'm really pleased that we're able to have this discussion with Emma Whitaker, who's our new Assistant Director of Planning and Planning Policy. And as part of the discussion, she will be able to give advice to members with the benefit of her professional expertise and knowledge of best practice elsewhere. I'll now hand over to officers to go through the session and how the session will run. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Ken.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, thanks, Councillor, and thank you, Madam Chairman. So really, so if I can draw members' attention to Annex 1 and Annex 2, and particularly to Annex 2. So we've provided Annex 2 in this way so that for ease of reference for the discussion. So if members have got specific questions, queries, or views on a specific point, they're numbered, and so you can refer to that. So rather than talk through them all individually now, members have obviously had the papers sent out to them. So the intention was to hand over to the chair to chair a discussion around it, with members having the opportunity to input. So that's the plan for the session, if that's okay.
Thank you. So do I have any questions? Councillor Dilks, thank you.
And before we get into it, Madam Chairman, I've read the report and thank you for it. This is effectively the first public meeting that we've had where we're going to discuss the actual proposals rather than the protocol as to how we're going to get there, or the process. I just think it would be helpful if we could get perhaps from Ken or from anyone really a bit more guidance about who are Kratos, who have produced this report. Who are they? Who actually commissioned them? Why were they chosen? Why was it them? Because, and the reason I ask that is because at the governance meeting recently, there was questions about impartiality. I think I'll leave it there, but I just think it needs, because this is really the first public meeting where we're discussing the proposals or what we might change. There should be a little bit more explanation as introduction as to why we're where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to do that. So I think first point to make really is that although Kratos and with particularly the input from Steve Quartermain, who was the former chief planner at the MHCLG, developed some suggested protocols, and we asked them to do that. We have, as a council, continue to work with members and officers to refine those, so to ensure that they reflect our position. And Emma, since she's arrived, has had a fairly significant input on suggestions as well. So I wouldn't want, just to be clear to the committee, that we haven't just asked somebody else to come and do it and work through it. We've been very clear around doing that. So as you know, Kratos were commissioned initially to do the planning review because of their expertise in planning, and particularly because of their ability to call on Steve Quartermain, who is obviously a national leader in planning thinking. So the initial review that took place was commissioned, I believe, by the chief executive and the then director for growth, and then this later phase was commissioned by me in consultation with the chief executive, largely because we felt, with Steve's expertise in particular, but also their knowledge of South Kesteven that they could that they built up over the first review, that they would they could provide us with a good basis to have to move forward on, and to have discussions with members and officers around developing a set of protocols that meet our district's needs. So that I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Yeah, well, I'd say thank you for the answer, and I think it is appropriate to sort of have had that little bit of introduction, particularly, if we look, I'm looking at the chair here, we've got a new chairman. The former chairman, I've got to say, was removed. We've got new members of the committee here. We've got a new assistant director of planning who are welcome, and we've got a new director of growth and culture. We've got a new cabinet member. A lot of water's gone under the bridge since we received the original report a year ago or more, was it? About a year ago. So I just think that context was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mills?
Yes, just to follow on from that, I mean, there is a perception that Kratos maybe were operating on the basis of the government white paper, coming on to the statute book via a parliamentary bill. And as we've said, Steve himself is a national leader in planning, so I think that's fairly understandable perception. As that bill is now in doubt and has been taken away, how relevant are some of the proposals when it comes to the committee performances and the way we're going to operate? Because I think some of us, whilst there's a lot of good stuff, there is some weakening of committee powers. There is another perception that that was done in order to push things through to the benefit of developers. And I believe it's therefore we need to consider whether it's too early to implement any of these creators' proposals at the moment until the requirements of the planning situation nationally have been resolved. And I just wondered if somebody could comment on those perceptions, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Emma, could you reply to that one for me? Thank you.
Thank you. Planning review is something, or planning reform is something that's been on the cards for a little while, and as you all heard, is likely to be a little bit slower than had anticipated centrally. That said, I don't think the operation of this council's planning committee and ensuring that it runs efficiently, which we have a public duty to ensure, needs to be that closely linked to the planning reforms that were coming forward, or we believed were coming forward in the autumn. We've got a public duty to make sure that this committee operates efficiently and it deals with the applications that it should be dealing with. And those are the applications that are the more complex, strategic and controversial applications. It isn't your run-of-the-day, run-of-the-mill planning applications that officers are more than capable of dealing with, that perhaps have come in front of the planning committee. Before I was appointed, I watched a few planning committees and I've seen some very long agendas, a lot of items that you've got through, ranging from some with very healthy debates to others where there's been very limited debate and it's been voted through in 7 minutes at the end of an agenda. That doesn't really set out the right message for the customers. The planning committee is obviously a very front-focused, customer-focused sort of planning committee in terms of the council, and it's absolutely right that as a council, as councillors and as officers, we reflect from time to time whether we're operating in best practice. And that's in terms of our peers immediately, in terms of the local, our neighbouring authorities, but also across England and Wales. And just to put that into context, in January to March of this year, 96% of applications across England were delegated. In this council, it was 91%. You dealt with 25 planning applications across 4 planning committees in 3 months. That's a lot of applications for you as a committee to deal with. It's a lot of work for you as councillors to absorb and to give every single application the attention that it deserves. It's a lot for officers, obviously, in the background to prepare that. The scheme delegation and the amendments is not about taking away your powers. It's about improving engagement between officers and members, improving communication, and it's about making sure that you deal with the right applications and you can focus your time appropriately to those applications. And if that does mean that we have 25 applications in 3 months, so be it. But it's about making sure that it's proportional. So no, I don't think you need to worry too much about the white paper and what may or may not come of it. I think now is the right time, particularly with so many changes that have gone on, to actually self-reflect on how we're performing as a council, and sort of move this forwards. And hopefully I can bring some experiences from elsewhere and knowledge of other local authorities as well, and I can put it into the context if you've got specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that, Penny? Or?
Yes, thank you, Emma. When it comes to statistics, I'm a bit sceptical of statistics. They can say whatever you like, and I always think that needs to be put into an explanation of why that happened. I believe we had backlogs. It was a virtual time. There was a lot going on. I think the committee dealt with it very well. We were exhausted, I admit. So, you know, it's just a little bit wary of bland statistics like that. When you say what needs to come to committee, I was looking on page 11 of the written bit of the scheme of delegation. Could you explain to me exactly what paragraph 4 means? I'm a little confused by the way it's written. Thank you.
So this is that says proposals submitted by or on behalf of the council for its own developments on council owned land for major development or in relation to all other applications where objections have been received. So major developments has got a specific definition in terms of the Act. So it's more than 10 dwellings. There's an equivalent floor space, etc. And I've pointed you to the legislation there. But it basically means for transparency purposes, applications that are put in by South Kesteven District Council, either because or where we have an interest in the land come in front of the planning committee. That's quite normal, and that's there for transparency.
Are we talking then, when we say for major development or in relation to other applications where objections have been received, that only is applying to council applications and on council land, not generally? Can you clarify that?
Sorry, that's a very specific, where it's our application or our interest in the land. So it might be something that we've put in on our land. It might be a third party putting it in on our land. But yes, that's a very specific. You don't read that in conjunction with any of the other categories.
That because I'm easily confused by commas and what things mean sometimes. So when we do look at what matters to be presented to the planning committee, that is very restrictive, isn't it? Really, it's probably only 1 and 2, other than, you know, where we've got members of council or councillors or staff. I'm a little bit worried about this because, you know, we do have our local plan, and as I've often said, we are a bit light on SPD standards or guidance, which you're referring to here. I think probably the only one we've got is the design guidance, which is very comprehensive and excellent in itself. I'm just wondering what would then come to committee. I can't think we have very many that's a material departure. And also, where do reserve matters fit? Are they ever going to come to committee?
So in terms of material departures, you're right. There should be very few of those applications that are coming forward for approval. It's sort of instance that you might have if you've got an out-of-date local plan, for example, and therefore you've got those speculative developers that are picking on you because you perhaps haven't got a 5-year housing land supply. That's when you tend to get a lot of departures to the plan. So no, you're not going to get an awful lot that fall into that category. But again, it's right and proper that they're brought before planning committee and they're not delegated by officers, decided by officers. In terms of other applications, you specifically mentioned reserve matters, didn't you? I'm sure we could clarify that includes reserve matters, but I would read it that applications relate to your outline, your reserve matters, and your full applications for planning permissions. But if you wanted a bit of clarification so that was clearer, we can certainly look at that.
Thank you, Emma, for that explanation. We will get very few of number 1, I'm sure. We've got a new local plan and, you know, that's to our benefit, isn't it? So we're not going to get many of those. Number 2, contrary to the development plan standards and guidance, again, we should get very few of those really, shouldn't we? So I am beginning to wonder what will come to committee. It's not very thin, isn't it? And often, you know, it's not just the absolute major applications that causes problems. It can be the more minor ones in the villages, for example, that can cause problems. We are in a rural area. And I just wonder why it's so slim.
So in relation to point 2, I actually don't think on rereading, I think that's a duplication really of point 1. So you could probably delete point 2. I think it depends how you work it as councillors in terms of whether this means very few applications coming to planning committee or not. Really, it's about members. You know, you have your own wards, you know what's important in your ward, you know what will be having causing sort of concern or interest for your residents. Therefore, really the onus is on you as the ward councillors to come and have a discussion and to request that something comes to planning committee. So, and by giving good and proper planning reasons, again, it's about focusing the agenda. It's not the best use of anybody's time to have a catch-all that says all majors come to planning committee. So, for example, you can have a stable block, a single stable you could have in a very large field. Should that come to planning committee? Maybe, if it's really, really contentious, but 9 times out of 10, probably not. And I agree with you. You may sometimes end up with a development for, 8 dwellings in a very small settlement or hamlet. Should that come to committee? It might, yeah, absolutely, that might be the thing. But as ward councillors, you are the best people to come and speak to myself or to the chairman and the vice chairman and have that discussion and to put that request in so it comes to planning committee.
Thank you, Emma. I mean, nowhere does it really say that except when we get to the call-in section. But the other concern is that might apply to councillors on the planning committee who sort of know a bit more about planning and look at their own wards or adjoining wards and call something in. I am more concerned about the wider district, because if we're going to rely on ward councillors calling planning applications in, I think more training is probably required and more highlighting of what ward councillors can do. And if, for example, the planning committee are made aware of what planning applications are coming through, could they call it in on, but it will be in somebody else's ward? I think it's all a bit confusing, isn't it? We're going to be relying on this call-in procedure and we might not pick up some of the difficult ones. I don't know how we're going to find out about them. And I don't know. It's just nowhere in here as to what comes to committee. You're saying this, but if we're going to move to constitutions, I'm always a bit worried about constitutions, and Nick said can be very prescriptive. You know, once it's in a constitution, we're stuck, aren't we, with what it says? So can we have a bit more explanations? And just going on to the constitution, I mean, I'm very concerned about this prescriptive nature. I'm all for some flexibility. I hope the Constitution Committee have some flexible words at their disposal when they write the words. But also, and I'll put it in now, is it possible that when and eventually it gets to Constitution Committee and we get the prescriptive words, could we have a review to see how it's all going? Because sometimes you don't know until it's all worked out.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I think a review is not a bad thing. Sometimes you don't know until you try something, whether it's working or not. In terms of the prescriptive nature, I don't know how frequently you study other people's constitutions. Probably not. It's not the most riveting of bedtime reading. I've had a look at a few, and obviously at my last authority, I obviously had to work within a constitution there. What I would say is this is not unusual. This is the sort of wording that you will find in constitutions across the country, and it works. There is a catch-all in terms of at my discretion, I can take applications to planning committee. That's there to allow me to be pragmatic. So if you come to me and say, actually, I think perhaps it's not your ward, but it's something that you think maybe should go to planning committee and can give good reasons, I'm going to be pragmatic about that and have that discussion. I don't think you can be prescriptive and say, well, you could be prescriptive and say all majors, all minors, all whatever the case is, but you'll end up in the same situation you've got at the moment, where you will have applications that shouldn't be coming to committee because there's no merits in a debate because everybody's comfortable with it, that will come to committee because on paper it needs to come to committee. If we take this month's, I think we're still in September, aren't we? Just this month's planning committee, for example, we had 3 applications in Councillor Wood's ward in Long Bennington. I don't think they probably should have gone to committee because Councillor Wood had done an excellent job of engaging with the parish and with officers and had resolved the parish's concerns. So actually, that's a really good example of how it can work outside of the committee process. And that's the sort of work that I'd like to encourage in terms of that dialogue. But that's a really good example of how it can work without necessarily coming before a planning committee.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, Councillor Nick Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think Emma's maybe given the impression that the call-in process it's not a one-way curtailing of power, is it? You know, I think it's the way I interpret it, maybe that it's come across that the buck stops with you, but actually it's not. It's actually the complete opposite, where dialogue is encouraged, and if anybody has an opportunity to either call in or not call in an application, that can be done through the Assistant Director, through Emma.
Thank you, Nick. And can I go to Alan Robinson, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry to butt in on an interesting debate. I just wanted to assure members that we have got someone at reception, so if members of the public are keen to attend, they certainly can. There's somebody there to let them in now, so apologies for that. And also just to say I find Constitutions fascinating to read.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we can get you some help. Councillor Bob Adams, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The debate has expanded from when I put my name up, excuse the voice, but I do think we've missed a very important point in between some of the comments that Councillor Dilks and Councillor Milnes made, and that is the question of A, the government white paper, and B, the impartiality of these consultants. Their mission statement is that they are in existence to help developers get easy approval for applications. Now that is in direct contrast to the role that we as councillors undertake when we are elected, and that is to protect and support and develop the interests of our local communities. And I had the opportunity of reading these papers right from the early days of them coming out in 2020. And that situation, forget the government white paper for the time being, but that impartiality of consultants has never been adequately answered. And they can't be impartial when their mission statement is that we are here to advance the cause of developers. But that does happen, and I acknowledge that. And I did share at this council some years ago a similar scenario with wind farms, where we did get ultimately the right outcome. And I was very grateful to members of the council that sat on that committee, and it was cross-party. But it became very clear where the issue lay, which was between the interests of developers and the interests of members and the wards that they represent. And I've not heard anything yet, apart from to make me even more nervous, that divide is not going too far to develop as opposed to elected members. And if we fail in our duty to elected members, we will fail in the promise we gave when we accepted office. And that does concern me, and it does concern me very considerably. When we come into this chamber, we take our political hats off, but we all stand by that we will represent and fight for our residents as we see fit. Yeah, there's that caveat that we have got to agree with what they're telling us or support what they're telling us. But there is too much of this paper, Madam Chairman, which I think will come out later, which is watering down the influence that members can have with officers and what does not come to committee. And the more and more you water that down, the less influence members will have in how this district is developed, how it is taken forward, and the legacy that we leave to people coming after us. I'm not going to go into the detail of this report, Madam Chairman. I could keep you here till about 7 o'clock, and I'm sure you wouldn't allow me to speak for that length of time. But I do urgently and very sincerely plead with members to think about what they said when they came to be elected to this council, what they said they would do, and how this document fits in to those pledges that we gave our electorate. Thank you for that opportunity, Madam.
Thank you, Councillor Adams, and it's lovely to see you in the chamber. Who would like to answer that for me? Okay.
So I'm not sure. So I'm not quite sure which question you wanted answered for, Councillor, because
the microphone's been on. Where it affects those issues, I hope you pick them up again. Quite happy to repeat them. They're burned on my memory. But until we have got those underriding issues resolved to our satisfaction, not interested in Crater's satisfaction, and to some extent not interested in some of the, and I say this respectfully, some of the officers' thinking. It is what the members think and what the members want to do, and it is right for them to do to take this forward. And in the format that we've got it, I'm sorry it is not there.
okay, well, no, thank you for that. So I'll answer the first question, and I think the sort of second and third were probably Emma may be better placed to answer than me. But I think just to say to members that we as a council chose to undertake a planning review some time ago, and as you know, the decision was made to bring along Craters to support with the planning review. But it is our planning review which we've commissioned consultants to support us with, not the other way around. And we're at this point where again we've asked for some support, but we have taken on the views of that the consultant provided us with, and as a council now we have had opportunity to refine that informally, and we've had opportunity to consider them outside of in advance of things moving into the public domain, which we have taken, and the point of this process and the consultation process is to continue to do that, because any proposals that we take forward will be our proposals, as you rightly say, that we have to work and live with. So they're not dictated to us by a consultant. We have asked for expert advice, but we have and will consider consider them and cross-check them with our own views. And as I say, one of the things that's been really positive, I think, since Nicola's arrived and Emma's joined, is that we've been able to have that permanent officer team in to provide further input on the suggestions that the consultants initially made. So I think one of the things for me is saying that it's not the consultants' planning review. It's our planning review that we ask some consultants to help us with, and that's a really important distinction, I think, from some of the questions or perception that we have. Noting though all your comments, and thank you, Councillor Adams. And as I said beforehand, it's great to see you.
Emma,
Thank you.
Thank you. I've just pulled up the consultation document on the white paper. The first priority that was in there that the government said was that they will streamline the planning process with more democracy taking place more effectively at the plan making stage. And this will replace the entire corpus of plan making law in England to achieve this. The white paper wasn't about what should and shouldn't come to planning committee. Yes, it was about wholesale reforms within the planning process. And the act that we're working on is 1990. So, it's not the newest of acts, it's not the oldest of acts, but it's certainly not the newest of acts. And it's been amended so many times, it's not an easy read either. But actually it was pushing us towards much more of a focus on plan making, not development management, which is actually what the committee is doing. So actually, I don't think you should not review your committee role and purpose at this moment. I think now is the right time, because if the planning reforms don't come forward, which it looks like they're not, and even if they did come forward, they would take some time to come through. You're going to have to still have an operational planning committee, which is working effectively. And remember, you've got a public duty to make sure that it works effectively. It's not about watering down the powers. It's not about preventing applications from coming to planning committee. From my perspective, it's about encouraging that dialogue so that we can hopefully resolve things without necessarily come to committee, but the right applications come to planning committee, so that you're focusing your time and energy on the right applications coming forwards. But it's absolutely not about frustrating the power or the role of the planning committee at all. It's about making it work more effectively and efficiently within the systems and the framework, the legislative framework that we've got. And you're right, we have to determine applications in accordance with the development plan. And if they are in accordance with the development plan, do they need to come to planning committee? Sometimes, but sometimes not. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Emma. There's quite a few of you on the list. I know your hands keep on popping up, but you are on the list to speak, so don't worry, we will get to you all. Councillor Paul Woods, thank you.
It's actually me next, Phil.
It's Paul Woods, then it's you, Councillor Dilk, so don't panic. You're after Paul. Right, we've got, yes, we've got Councillor Woods, Councillor Dilks, Councillor Bishnell Singh, Councillor Morgan, Councillor Stevens, Councillor Selby, Councillor Cabry-Brown.
Madam Chairman, I'm sorry, I put my hand up right second answer. We open the debate.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't note you then, but I'm going with the list I've got, thank you.
I put my hand up after Penny actually. If I could just say, I mean, there's been some interesting points made, and particularly by Councillor Mills and Councillor Bob Adams, really. When I was to come here, my first thoughts were, well, there's a white paper coming out, and I wondered whether we should wait, because my impression is that white paper will probably get nowhere, so we'll have to wait and see. Also, Councillor Bob Adams raises some interesting points about craters, and I must admit, I've never been that impressed with the report. And I do wonder whether now, it was the report I've got, the original one I think is dated September 2020. And I wonder whether that's outdated really and shouldn't be relied on that much, particularly when we're not sure of what craters, where their impetus is for doing that report really. And I would question that. Are they impartial? They came out with a lot of recommendations. And I must admit, some of them are probably okay, but some of them I certainly didn't agree with. But I'm a little bit confused about this informal meeting now. Are we actually discussing the Craters report and the recommendations, or are we discussing a review of the planning committee and how it operates? Now, I picked up very much what, with the greatest respect for Emma, Penny and I met her on Friday and gained a lot of useful information. And I fully respect your knowledge, Emma, and everything. And I can see where you're coming from. The strong impression I get from Emma is I think too many applications are probably coming to the committee. And she thanked me for what I did at the last committee, maybe to have discussions beforehand. That was okay and that worked out well. And I would always try and do that, but that might not always be the case. I mean, obviously I did have a meeting, it was successful. And at the end of the day, I would have been happy for those applications not to come to committee because, but to start with, I did want them to come to committee. So there is that element, and I wouldn't want to support anything that takes away any responsibility away from members, because I think it's important, like Councillor Bob Adams says, it's important why we're elected to make decisions on things and not to be pushed into something and done. So I think we need to be careful to protect that. But I also can see what Emma says, there's probably too many applications coming to committee and bogging you down, and maybe some that don't have to come to committee. So I'm quite happy that we have a review, but I think we've got to be careful about trying to follow what creators say, because I haven't got much faith in creators or what they recommend at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
So yeah, just to come back, so just on what we're discussing, so the piece around this meeting is the second bit of work that we did around the planning review, which took place in the early this year, in sort of around April time. It started to take place around them, and then has come forward in consultation with members informally around the operation of the planning committee and the protocols and processes that support that. The wider review is within the scope of the governance and audit committee, and we gave a full update on the wider review in July, and we'll do it at future meetings. So, but the purpose of this session today is around the protocols and processes associated with the planning committee.
Thank you, Councillor Dilks.
Thank you. I welcome a review. I welcome a review of what we do and making sure that we're efficient and everything. And we should do that from time to time. I've got to say, I'm not sure why we had to spend, is it 40,000? Is it 50,000? I'm not sure how much was spent of public money on a consultants, a bunch of consultants from London, we're told are experts, whose rationale is, as the former chairman said, is to make it easier for developers. And I've got to say, that's what this does. There are some good things in it. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some good things in it, particularly, and I'll get on to when we get to it, the reviewing the 6 monthly reviews of looking at, some of our previous decisions in those 6 months, or when they get built out. We've been talking about that for years. We didn't need Kratos to tell us that, frankly. We've been talking about it for years, but we've never done it, So somebody mentioned about democracy. It is about democracy. And I've got to say, I'm a Democrat and proud of it. And I think we all are. And this, as a result of, if we adopt what's in this Kratos, in these recommendations, there will be fewer opportunities of democratic open hearings in this committee. That's what we're told from day one, from minute one, is that's the idea, is to stop things coming to committee, to stop too many coming to committee. It's 95% are dealt with by officers across the country, we're told, and only 91% here. Oh, it's terrible, isn't it? I don't think it is terrible. And I think there's a lot of things that are being recommended here for us that is, sledgehammers to crack a nut, and even worse, where there isn't a problem at all, where it ain't broke, and why are we trying to fix it? I spent 2 days coming to, when was it? I can't remember when it was, but, when Kratos came out with with this report, it went to a committee and then it was withdrawn. Rightly so, it was withdrawn because the planning committee hadn't even considered it. But when we did get to consider it, Kratos come and sit on the top table and lecture us about it. And in 2 days of workshops, we didn't even get to the first recommendation. It was all talking about, you know, things above our heads, I've got to say. And now I've come to what Emma's just said, and I welcome Emma to the council, I really do. But, you know, you're saying, right, okay, we're going to be flexible, come and see us. But what we're doing is we're writing a load of rules. So what you're saying is we're going to write these rules, but let's not worry about them, because if you come and see us, we'll talk about it, and you can, you know, we'll be flexible. Well, it's either got to be one or the other, I've got to say, and we can do that now. I just want to go to Paul Wood's, the example that, you know, what Paul Wood did at the last, that was excellent, of course. But at the moment on calling, Councillor Wood had to call that in at a very early stage. And one of the best things I thought that Kratos came out with, that wasn't in their report, but at the very first meeting that we had with them following the report, we had a little debate, and they said, oh, you know what, it would probably be better to have calling open to councillors later on in the process, so that we know, you know, when we actually have got some idea where the officer's recommendation will be. Do you see what I'm saying, Nick? So that you're looking confused, but let me finish. And because at the moment we only have, is it 20 days there, 21 days, you know, that we're allowed once it's been. So we come out, and we have to come out with planning grounds, material considerations as to why we want this to come to committee. Frankly, I think that's nonsense. I think if any committee member, particularly, or indeed any member, wants to call something in, I think there should be a pretty good reason as to why it's not called in. I don't think those members should have to give, you know, chapter and verse as to why it should be called in. That's what Councillor Adams was talking about when we signed up to be a councillor, in my view. I'll keep going. I'm hoping, Madam Chairman, that we are going to start going through the paper, and I appreciate the difficulty from the chair, but, you know, I don't want to be shooting all over the place on this, and I'm hoping that we're going to go through these one by one when we actually get into what I might call the proper debate, rather than just the introductory comments that I think we're still in. One by one. Oh yeah, that was that. Can I just say a little bit on the major applications? I had written in big letters next to point 4 that Councillor Milne raised, you know, clarify, does this mean all major applications or just the ones that the council is making? And it seems to be just the ones the council are making. So I just want clarification. Does this mean that some major applications will not come to committee because this committee changed the rules 3 or 4 years ago after a celebrated case, and sorry Bob, and we changed the rules so that all major applications come to committee? Now, I accept what Emma's saying, and I think it is a step forward to say we don't need the stable in the middle of a big field. You know, that is a step forward to take that off. But it needs some sort of, you know, schedule or scheme of, you know, the wording needs to be a little bit more clarified in what we are going to do as to what should come. And, you know, it frightens me that some major applications would not come to committee, that we think that some major applications can go to, you know, can be dealt with by officers. I think that's nonsense, personally. And there's so much in even on this first page, we talk about, you know, proposals that are going to be presented have to be significantly contrary to the local development plan. Well, either they're, you know, what is significantly? They're either, you know, within the plan or they're not. I know it's difficult sometimes to say that, but significantly is difficult. We get down to item 3 on the first page, proposals which are controversial. Who says what's controversial in the opinion of the ADP? Well, you know, under this, I think some applications that ward members, you know, in our own wards, that have been really worth bringing to committee would not actually come to committee under these rules. And they are rules. It's a scheme of delegation and protocols. You know, that's what we're trying to write down. And so I think we've got to be really careful. And I think there's a lot of work to do to make this document in any way acceptable to this committee. And I don't think I'm just talking for myself. I think, you know, most members actually feel that. Cross-party, I'm pleased to say. I'll shut up now, thank you. But I hope I can come back on when we start going through the item by item.
Thank you. I don't think we were intending to go item by item.
Why not?
We can.
Yeah, so the intention is obviously Annex 2 in particular has been set out in a way to make it easy for members to draw attention to specific points or specific questions that they want to raise. So the intention was, as I set out at the start, just to enable members to reference points, and then we can have a discussion about them as members wish on that point. So that the onus is on you to raise a point that you have concern around or want to consider.
Also, I thought I'd press it. I'm trying to be helpful to the debate. Otherwise, we're going to be shooting all over the place. And I just thought it would be helpful to go through them one by one and to see, you know, what the committee feels is acceptable and what isn't. And I just sort of had one sort of overall remark was that I meant to mention earlier was, you know, planning. You know, it's the most front-facing thing that we do for many of our residents. You know, most residents, apart from having their bin empty, don't actually see us in operation. But, you know, when their application does come to committee, they say, and what if it doesn't come to, and even if it does come to committee, how many times do we hear residents, and it really annoys me, say, oh yeah, I don't know why I've come today, because it's only a rubber stamp anyway. You're going to do what you're told to do because the officer's recommendation is to approve. Well, we don't always, do we? And I think we've got a reasonably good record, and I'd like to have a look at that record of, you know, when we do overturn an officer's recommendation, you know, what sort of record do we have when it comes to appeals? I don't think it's a bad record.
Thank you. Taking the points in reverse, I can't give you the appeals statistics at the moment, I'm afraid, but I'll have a look into that for you. You've made some really interesting points, actually. In terms of the wording around significantly contrary to the objectives or departure, in planning terms, you have to look at the plan as a whole. So you have to look at all of the policies, but you're also charged with making a balanced decision. So there will be benefits, there will be harms that arise, and you as decision takers may come to a different conclusion to myself, and that's fine, as long as you follow due process and you've weighed and balanced things appropriately. You can legitimately approve something which may be contrary to something, but the benefits outweigh the harm. And that's why you've got to be very careful about the wording. Just because it's contrary to something doesn't mean that it's necessarily unacceptable. And I'll take infrastructure contributions or affordable housing as just a very quick example. Often we have to make very difficult decisions because something may not be fully viable in financial terms for everything that we would want. And therefore you have to make a balanced decision. Sometimes that means it's actually unacceptable, but other times you may say, look, we want this because the economic benefits of this coming forward outweigh the fact we're not getting as much affordable housing, or you may go the other way around, obviously. So that's why there's that subtlety around the wording to allow those that perhaps don't tick one little box, but actually in the wider scheme of things are acceptable. I think as well, I'm just wondering whether members are perhaps not reading this quite in the way it's intended, and maybe we could do a bit of work in terms of the presentation, because the very first thing that you should be thinking of is anything that you as members call to planning committee with a valid planning reason goes to planning committee. That's actually the first thing. And I think you're missing that section because you're jumping straight to the points of, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But that's really the overarching, that's a catch-all. If you as councillors provide a good planning reason for something to go to planning committee, it's going to come to planning committee. It is important that you give planning reasons. And I don't know if you've thought about why you give planning reasons. Firstly, it's to make sure that we're looking at the right things. But secondly, it's so that you've given an indication to the planning committee what you would like them to look at. Otherwise, they could be faced with looking at a planning application and not really knowing why it's been called in, what the key issue was. If the key issue is affordable housing, or the key issue is a neighbour amenity issue and overlooking or something like that, that's your planning reason for it to come to planning committee, because that's what you want the committee to look at. It's working on the assumption that hopefully everything else is okay, but that's what you want the committee's time to focus on. So that's why it's really important that you do give planning reasons, but it's not difficult to give planning reasons. And I think Councillor Milnes said something earlier that I forgot to mention. This was around the training. I completely agree. Training is so important. It's important for officers, but it's also really important for you as councillors. And I think no matter what we end up with, there probably needs to be some training for councillors so you fully understand how the Constitution works for you, how applications are determined, how they get to planning committee. Does that help?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's the button. I blame the button. Yes, thank you. I'm just on the reasons. I find it interesting, of course, that we've got proposals which are controversial or likely to be of a significant public interest will come to the committee or will be presented to the committee. But, that's not a material planning consideration. And what worries me about calling, and this was what worried Kratos initially in their original report, if I'm not mistaken, about us giving the planning considerations when we call something in, is that suggests that we are biased against or for that particular application. And there was a suggestion that we should not then take part in the debate or vote on that particular one if we've called it in. I'm just checking, I can't see it in, I think it's gone now, hasn't it? That suggestion, it's not in here, is it? So anyone that calls something in is still going to be allowed to take part, etc. But can you see what I'm saying? That by giving the material considerations as to why you wish something to be called in, it does surely infer that you have got a predisposition to the application.
I don't think, Councillor, you need to worry about that at all. That's about how you word things. That's about predisposition, about predetermination, which you'll all remember from your training is something that we need to be ensuring we don't do. It means about coming with an open mind to the planning committee. It's perfectly reasonable to say, I am concerned about the highway impacts of this development and I would like the planning committee to look at this. You haven't predetermined it. You're just concerned about something. What you could do, point 3, is actually about my discretion to bring anything to planning committee that I see fit. So you could just simply say at any item at the discretion of the Assistant Director of Planning. Because I do understand the point you're making about the controversial. That's probably there just to give you a bit of reassurance that actually for those bigger applications that are on the political radar or do have a lot of public interest, they're the sorts of applications that I'd bring at my discretion. But it is simply just at my discretion.
So thank you for that. But it actually, in many cases, it's the smaller applications that are the real controversial ones, if I could say that. And I think about, the one in my ward, colleagues will know what I'm going to say, the dog agility, which hasn't been, which has gone to appeal, which is it's been 9 months with the inspector, but it was hugely controversial in my patch. But I'm not sure under this regime that it would be allowed to come to committee. Well, thank you.
Absolutely, it would be allowed to come because either I I mean, do you think I like to make those decisions on those controversial applications? But that's something that I could pick up under my discretion, or you as the ward councillor could come to me, and at any point you could come to me and say, look, actually, I'm really concerned about that particular application. So it's not about preventing those smaller applications, because I do understand a single house in some of your smaller settlements could be just as controversial as a couple of hundred in say Grantham or one of the larger settlements.
And just going back to all major applications, not just council, but all major applications would come through the council, wouldn't they, and the committee?
No, just the major, just council major, everything else would need a call in. But in reality, you know, it's a call in from councillors with a planning reason.
Thank you, councillor. Very quickly then, councillor.
Just to clarify from Emma, please. Are you saying we could write that in, that the director of growth or assistant director of growth has call-in discretion? Because I don't think that's actually written in, it's not clear anyway. And just going back to all majors, you know, I've got a list here of what is major under the Planning Act. I mean, there isn't much that shouldn't come to us. And maybe the odd stable in a field could be put into a little appendix, so it could all come to committee, but they could be like, you know, on a bit of the back burner at the back of the papers rather than for full discussion. Because I think we're all frightened that things are going to fall between stools here. And, you know, if we haven't noticed something, it's all going to be under the delegated system. Now, we've all got PTSD about the delegated system, I have to tell you. I mean, things have got better of late, and I appreciate that the recent officers have been a lot, we've had more positive dialogue, but that wasn't the case 2 years or so ago when I first started here. It was like hitting brick walls, and you could, you know, you might not have even got the discretionary call in because it was just, you know, a brick wall. So things are improving, but I think we have got a bit of PTSD here.
So point 3 is really just, it's essentially saying at my discretion. So you could change that if we felt that that was appropriate, just so it said at any application at the discretion of the head of service, with no further clarification. I really don't mind. It's, to my mind, it's saying the same thing, but whatever's easiest and most understandable to everybody. I'm just going to give you an example as to, I get the concern about the stable in the fields and it being shoved at the end of the committee agenda, but let me just flip something around the other way. When I first started at my last authority 16 years ago, we used to have 2 committees a month. At that planning committee, you would have a whole bunch of applications that would go through at the beginning en bloc if there was no public speaking and no request for a debate. And that was largely householder applications and other minor applications. And they were there simply because we'd received a certain number of objections to an application. So they had to go to planning committee. So that resulted in 2 every single month. Each application with a committee report, all published, lots of officers, lots of councillors having to read all of those papers. I frequently had customers who've just sat through a 3 or 4 hour planning committee going, I didn't quite get when my application was determined. Oh, your application went through in the first 5 minutes en bloc and was just voted for. And that poor person's then sat through 3 or 4 hours of planning committee just for their application to go through. So actually, it's really not a good idea to make those customers sit and wait through all of that other debate. It's the same if you're not going to debate an application, and if you're not going to add value to that application and you're leaving it to the last just because it's a simpler, easier application and it goes through. And I sat and watched a planning committee before I had my interview here. It was 7 minutes, one item. And I think one councillor said how wonderful they thought it was. And then you voted. It added nothing to that committee, to that item. And that customer may or may not have been present in the room, I don't know, but they had to sit and wait for that debate, that non-existent debate to happen. That isn't good customer service either. So that's what we're trying to avoid, that kind of situation, not the bigger applications that you need and deserve your attention.
Thank you.
So where in
Penny,
here?
Penny, can I
Sorry,
just-
okay, but I'm trying to get clarification. That's all.
Yeah, I know, but you're jumping in and there's been lots of people, you've had a good half hour and there's lots of people who've got other questions they wish to ask. So I'm trying to be fair. Thank you. Councillor Bisnow-Singh, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My brain is totally scrambled now. I have forgotten where I was. What was my questions? There's a lot have been said, but a lot been pointed out by Councillor Adam. So I don't really know where to start. Quite a lot, some of them points have been covered by it. But I would just like to reiterate, because I'm not a great fan of employing consultant, because I think we don't get value for money for it. And I was not very impressed by Kratos' report here, because some of the things that we did suggest are never taken into considerations here. But with this report, my main point that I'm concerned is on item number 3 on page 11, which is the impact on corporate priorities. I don't know why I understand that the corporate priorities will take priority over other issues that may come with regards to planning. For example, I'll give an example, like in Stamford, where was a Cherry Hall development. That was for affordable social housings there. Is that part of the corporate priorities taken from the Director of Housing, that they insist that we need that? So the planning committee must more or less turn a blind eye to it. So those are the kind of things that I'm really concerned about, how many of these corporate priorities that will take precedence over the planning committee here, because also that also places quite a lot of power and in the hands of the ADP to make the decisions to go through. So I think probably the way I'm viewing it, that it will reduce the number of planning applications probably coming to be decided by the committee in that. The corporate priorities will be, I feel it's not being properly defined here. What is the responsibility? Where is the boundaries within which that it will operate, and how are we to consider it? Now, I'm also very concerned about the limitations on the site visit that's going in place. Okay, the reason given, probably we can consider that. But I feel probably site visit is very, very essential for us to see as members, to see where the application is and how it interacts within the community and the settings. So I feel there is a number of things of that probably, as Councillor Dilks, we should go item by item and probably if we are modifying, we're writing a new rules, So we need to take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Emma?
Thank you. And obviously, I'll leave it to you, Chairman, to decide how you want to go through and whether or not taking the site visits, for example, we want to understand exactly what the concern is. But I just wanted to come back on the point about the corporate priorities. So and apologies if I sound like I'm lecturing slightly, as a planning committee and as planning officers, we are charged with determining applications in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and that's what it says in the legislation. That means you have to assess it against obviously your plan, as you all know, but it does mean that sometimes corporate priorities and other documents can be a material consideration that you take into account. So affordable housing, for example, delivery of is a corporate priority. That means as a planning committee, not only would you give significant, you say that the delivery of affordable housing is a significant benefit, but because it's a corporate priority, it might be a significant benefit that you give significant weight to in that balancing decision. And that's obviously then you've got to then weigh up the pros and cons. And it might then be that the fact that it's affordable housing outweighs a conflict somewhere else, or there may be no conflict anywhere else, but that's how you take into account a corporate priority as such. It's because we need affordable housing, if it's affordable housing. Climate change, we've declared a climate change emergency, so that's another corporate priority. If you get a proposal that's proposing renewable energy, you have to give that significant, or you have to give that a good amount of weight. Does that help explain how that goes? But it's not about the head of housing, for example, telling me we've got to approve, or telling the committee that we've got to approve an affordable housing scheme. It's about the amount of weight you as decision makers should be giving to that particular benefit.
Yes, thank you for that. But you see, the amount of weight we give, as far as you're saying, affordable housing or social housing has far greater priorities than what actually the environment where we're planning to put it offers. So you see, but if, for example, the example I quote to you in Stamford, we have got a monument there. It's an ancient monument that's there. Does that not take precedence, right? Because that's part of the conservation area.
Now, that's a very interesting debate, and forgive me, I don't know the detail of the application, but if you've got a protected heritage asset, which is perhaps listed, or a monument that's got status, actually the legislation requires you give great weight to the heritage of that. So you've got a very tricky balance when, to make, because you've got competing decisions. But if it's causing harm to the heritage asset, you may go in favour of the heritage asset in that particular instance. But that again is a decision and a balance that the decision maker would need to take. And if it comes to committee, that would be your decision as the committee.
Thank you. What I will do, the list of people I've got down to ask questions, we will do that, and then we will have a break. And in the meantime, I will be thinking about how we proceed. Everybody happy with that? Thank you. Right, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. First of all, I concur with the comments made by Councillor Adams. Actually, I raised a concern regarding Kratos at the previous meeting. And I think one of the reasons that councillors are uncomfortable, very uncomfortable with their particular selection was on some research. First of all, they're not independent. They actually ran a forum for developers in London, an exhibition in effect, organised that. And secondly, we were sold that they were highly qualified, experienced people coming forward to give us advice. And when you actually looked at their credentials, being blunt, there are a number of members of this committee with as much experience and qualifications as they had. So we really couldn't understand why we spent so much money on them. And as has been said, the report proved very controversial, and certainly the first few hearings I had of it, I was working during the initial workshops, but took part on the online subsequent workshops. But it was clear that councillors were very uncomfortable with what was being proposed, and I think some of that might come out now. I'd like to pick up, if I may, a few more things that have just been discussed now. A bit like Harish, I'm feeling so much of the way it's all been dealt with but some very important points. First of all, I'm sorry, I totally don't agree with the fact that Long Bennington shouldn't have come to the last committee, and I will say why. And that's because I put forward an amendment to the conditions there, which actually got on a multi-acre site in a rural area, a field that would have been covered in tarmac without a tree in sight. We got landscaping put forward that the officers had not considered, with the greatest respect to them, at all. There was nothing. And with shading. And I hate to think what will happen in that tarmac field without the shading that I hope that landscape's going to provide on a hot summer's day. With a load of cars sitting on it. That could be very interesting. So I think actually it just kind of proves the opposite. It proves why it's so important actually some applications do come to committee. One of the things that's to me very, very important is clarity for members of the public around the process and the transparency of it. Simple rules that they understand, that we all understand. There's clear lines. There's no, there's not room for much debate. What is major, what isn't major, clearly define rules that we all understand. As soon as we start getting into a situation, from my experience, well, I can't tell you whether it's going to come to committee or not as a councillor. It's going to be at the discretion of a planning officer. That's when I get hit trouble with residents. That's when they're really unhappy. It's not sitting waiting in a meeting to maybe have a matter decided quite quickly. It's things like that that really concern them. It's a lack of transparency. So I think what we have here is some very blurred and very unclear rules. And I think that we really do need to, we need to be clear. I'm not at all comfortable, for example, that only our major developments come to committee. We've had the rule before, and I think it should stay that all major developments should come, and we shouldn't have to call them in. I know one of the really controversial things that has clearly been touched on from earlier in the process was around the calling process as well, and who can call in. And originally we were just saying only the ward member. And I know I raised a big concern about that because there are applications right on the very edge of a ward, and they can very significantly impact on the neighbouring ward and maybe others. And we've kind of touched on that a bit because we've said adjoining wards been added in there, which I appreciate. The thing is, though, that there might be other wards affected. So I think that would be an appropriate thing to say. And really, if we're going that far, why don't we allow any member to call something in if they have a real concern about it? And it might be, I think Harish touched on a really important one there. I'm a member of a civic society. I'm really interested in heritage, and I don't care. I'm not parochial. I don't care if it's in Grantham or Stamford, Bourne or Deeping. If it's a part of our heritage and I can see it's under threat, and I might well want to say, hang on, this is our district. We're meant to be representing our district. So, you know, it's our district asset. So we should be able to call that in. And I'd be grateful if someone spots something I haven't in my ward and just call it in. Occasionally it does happen. So the other thing I think that's very important, I think Councillor Dilts touched on this, and I think this is actually really important. And I think it really came up at our last very in-depth meeting when we were talking about the bridge at Bourne. And really what struck me there was the timing of the paper, because we had in front of us, I remember we had a very long debate, and we came to the point where we actually were minded to refuse. And we were put in a position where somebody in the process, an officer, had worded something in the paper that in effect predetermined the destruction of the bridge. And it had been written and built into the conditions, even though nothing historically had led to that. Now, it was only an example, an important one. And what it made me realise is one of the problems we have is, as committee members especially, perhaps generally with members, is we don't see the paper until it's public, and the developers maybe already started working towards it, especially on a major development, especially on a phased development. And some of the conditions, I mean, what we discovered subsequently on that case had actually been signed off before we'd even sat and had the meeting. So I think we really need to be really pinning down what the rules actually are around that for the protection of the reputation of the council, the councillors and the officers involved in that. It could otherwise have looked really dodgy, to be honest with you. I don't think that was the intent, but it could have done. And I think we tend to see those papers literally 2 weeks before, or sometimes less than that. The late papers, even less than that, especially if there's condition changes at the very last minute, and they can be really important. So I think we could do with almost like a draft document that comes to committee members in advance of them going public. So if there is anything controversial in there, we are concerned about. If we think there's inaccuracies, because a lot of inaccuracies also came out from that particular meeting, which had been pointed out from local councillors who knew the area very, very well. I think that we could knock that on the head, and we could be making sure those documents really are accurate. There was another case, I can't remember which one it was. It was the college, actually. It was relatively minor, but the conservation area description was completely wrong for that, which I didn't make a big deal of at the time, but it was. So I think that there's an issue there, that there are some things not in here which are as important as the things that are in here that might need debate. I do think, though, what we have to be considering, as I said, transparency, how clear it is, how clear are these rules, how simple are they for everybody, including lay people, to understand. Now, I'd just like to touch on controversial from my experience. Usually when something's controversial, there is an underlying planning reason. It's just a member of the public may not realise what it is because they don't understand all of the planning terms. And usually it's something like density, overlooking, things like loss of privacy, things like that, usually are what make applications, or highways are what make things controversial. So I think, though, that as members, we should be able to make that decision, and it shouldn't necessarily be left to the ADP, not to make it personal at all, and it's nothing to do with you, but the actual role. I don't want to go into too much more detail because I have got a number of other comments to make throughout the document, but I understand we'll be doing that later, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Could you turn your mic off, please? Thank you. Councillor Nick Robbins, yes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just come back on what Councillor Morgan said. I mean, I think it was a really poor choice of words to say something's dodgy in the planning service. But if you want to take that back, if you want, so yeah, my mic's yeah. There's nothing dodgy about the planning service. If you want to take that back, that's fine. You can do that. The predetermination on the bridge, I don't understand. If we're going to talk about the bridge, the only predetermination I can see on the bridge was the fact that it wasn't even on the planning application to start off with, and the bridge was predetermined to be demolished 20 years ago. But that's aside. The sort of main answer to your question about the calling in, it's absolutely right that a councillor in the south of the district would call in an application in the north of the district when they have little local knowledge on it. I understand, and I respect your opinion about we're all district councillors and for the good of the district, and I agree with that, and I absolutely support that. However, we have made it slightly easier for councillors now to be made more aware of the applications that are coming to their ward by an automatic email coming out to any application that is received in the councillor's ward. That ward councillor will get an email to say that to alert them to the fact that that's coming out. We appreciate, and we've done some work around how many councillors actually look at the weekly list. Not many. If your ward is right at the end and there's only one application, you probably don't see it and move on, and then only find out that you've got a controversial application in your ward and it's too late to do something about it. So we've looked at that, we've identified that, and we appreciate that happens. So as I say, that will be happening as part of the report. And I also appreciate that there's a lot of councillors that know more about stuff than each other. So, for example, biodiversity I know nothing about, and there's lots of learned councillors that do. So if there was an application in my ward that had some biodiversity issues, and that ward council wanted to call it in, then it's down to the two ward councillors to discuss it with each other and then come to a decision that yes, that can be called in if there's something that the other ward councillor didn't know about, for example. So we've made that process a lot easier to make people aware, ward councillors aware of applications in their area.
Thank you, Councillor Robbins. Yeah, councillors.
Sorry, I was asked to respond. I said the public perception. I was very careful about that. It's all about perception, and unfortunately, comments have been made to that effect by members of the public. So but it was not, I'm merely the messenger about that, but what I'm saying is we do have to be very careful. And you responded to my comment about, I was using that example, but if we go back to that, the point was that the bridge wasn't mentioned at all in the original paper, neither for demolition nor for saving. It was therefore open to interpretation, and it was interpreted a specific way in the paper, which meant it couldn't be debated fully at the meeting.
Councillor Robbins, you want to come back on that? Right, thank you. It better be quick.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, to make the concession. Just a quick, with regard to councillors from a ward, as you just made up with biodiversity, yeah, we have had applications, and I can give you quite a number of them with different ward in Stamford, where those councillors will not call an application. He said they will leave it to the planning committee to do that. That's what they have been said.
If it's left to the planning committee, then it has been called in then, hasn't it? Surely, is it not? So that's the whole purpose, isn't it? If you say it's been left down to the planning committee, then somebody would have called it in, either the assistant director or that ward councillor.
What actually, I mean, I'm in the planning committee here, so the implication is that you are in the planning committee, you can call it in. But I'm not in that ward, I'm not even the adjacent ward, but I'm alternate wards on the other side.
Okay, I mean, this is with all new reviews and the outcomes of the reviews, there's going to be new procedures and protocols, isn't there? So that as it stands at the moment is very obscure. It's difficult to read, but if and when the creators report or the planning review comes through in its entirety and is adopted, then there'll be training and information and communication to say exactly what the new processes and protocols are. So for example, if it's now adopted in its state now, then there'll be a lot of communication to say to the ward councillors, if you see a potential problem in another ward, you speak to the district councillor on that particular ward and work with them rather than against them. Because sometimes actually we can stick our noses into stuff that actually is no relevance, and we're thinking, well, why are you calling in my ward? Why are you overtaking what I'm trying to do? And that again, the public perception is infighting between ourselves. So let's talk to each other. Let's talk to the planning service. Let the planning service talk to us, and let's talk to each other. And if there is a genuine concern that a ward member has outside of their ward, then they can work with the ward member to bring that to a conclusion.
Thank you.
So Nick, is that not another way of saying, should we have two lists, one for your ward and one of all the weekly lists? Because otherwise we won't know what's on the other list if we just get what's in our ward, would we?
Will the weekly list will still be sent out? Yes, you do, yeah. But it will be, if the ones don't read the weekly list, which, as I say, there are a few, then, and it's down to them, so you will get an automated email to say there is an application in your ward, and then you can have a look at the weekly list as well. Yeah, so you can then have a look at the district-wide issues and see if there's anything that would be controversial that you think you can help that ward councillor.
Thank you. Can we just go through the chair, please? Thank you. Harish, can I go on to Councillor Selby? Thank you.
Just a quick, so does that mean?
Just ignore me then, Harish, that's fine.
I thought just a...
Sorry.
No.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much.
Good try, Harish.
Over an hour and 40 into the meeting, Madam Chairman, I've not spoken yet. I've waited patiently. As it may be another hour before I get to speak again, Madam Chairman, I'm going to be short and concise with the points that I've got that I wish to make, Madam Chairman. So I hope you'll allow me to do that. Informal meeting, Madam Chairman, hence why I've not got time today. It states on the agenda informal, so that's the reason no tie today, Madam Chairman. First of all, from the outset, I say regardless on some of the points that's been raised, regardless of whether there's been a white paper or not. I think it's this review is, I think it's a lot of it's common sense. And it's to help us to improve performance. There is one thing I disagree with, which I shall come on to, which I don't see as common sense. I really don't. But anyway, I'll make that point in a moment. And going onto the items that's referred to committee. At the end of the day, it's about finding the balance, isn't it? About finding the balance of what the public would like, you know, as time constraints and all that, Madam Chairman. Question I'd got for Emma is, please, and by the way, nice to see you still here, Emma, after the following meeting, previous meeting. Yeah, my question on that particular, I know this is maybe a minor point, but it's about the smaller things coming to committee. Can you just explain, please, Emma, what is the difference between a non-material amendment and a retrospective planning application? Although they're both retrospective, one was obviously a smaller minor thing, but yeah, that's one question, please. If you could just explain what that is, please. Next point is with regarding members when they declare an interest in something. Is it now an outdated sort of protocol that members of the committee actually leave the room when an item comes before the committee? Because the reason I asked that question is because as it's now on the internet, all the items are recorded. A member could leave the room, they could go and sit in the members' room, and they could watch it on the computer or whatever. So is it really an outdated protocol that a member could they just sit and say nothing and not participate? Is basically that point. Yeah, with it's a question I sort of asked at the last committee meeting, and I would, with regarding the appeals, when something goes to an appeal, I would like us to have some examples of the costs involved. Maybe it's when something goes to appeal, maybe an example of a major application, of intermediate one and a minor one, so that we know exactly the costs, you know, in pounds and pence or whatever. If we could have some sort of examples in maybe something comes to us to give us examples. Because when we had one application, didn't we, that went against us when it went to bill with regarding on Manthorpe Road by the traffic lights there. You know, I'm thinking in something lines of those. One of the things I'll say that I disagree with, that for me is not common sense, is with regarding site visits. Now, if you were unable to attend the site visit for whatever reason, and you wanted to make a private visit, and you say you've got a field, for example, and an open field where you're going to have a development, and you went along in your own, by yourself, and you went and stood at the gate and you looked in and whatever. That's regarded as a private visit, surely. Now, where I think it would be totally wrong is if you went along to view a site on your own, and then you'd got the developer there or whatever, or somebody else, and you were discussing them. That's totally bang out of order, right? But if you went along on your own, it was pre-arranged or whatever, that you could just go and have a look and clarify something in your own mind that you wanted to say satisfy your own mind. Personally, I don't see the problem with that whatsoever. You know, if you're minding your own business, not interfering with anybody else, and just clarifying something, I don't see the problem in a call it a classed as, if you like, a private visit. Yeah, I don't see the problem with that whatsoever. But if you're going and somebody else is there with you, that's a different matter altogether, in my view. Question with regarding agents attending site visits. You may recall, Madam Chairman, I think you was there, that when we attended a site visit at Grimsthorpe Castle a year or so, which is not, there was members, I know there was members there, there was one of the agents turned up, and it was, to be fair, he was giving us good advice on the application, background information. So I'm just asking the question is, would it now be the case that agents wouldn't be allowed to attend in that sort of capacity in the future? I'd like to ask just clarify what the design paddies will be, please. I'll just briefly say pass on that. Now, here's the next one. Only got 2 more points, Madam Chairman, I'll be brief. With regarding the section on gifts and hospitality. Now, as councillors, especially if you've been a past mayor or if you're past chairman or whatever. We get invited to a lot of events, lots of hospitality events and this, that and the other. It's part of our job as councillors to go to all sorts of events. And while we're there, this may sound an odd way of putting it, but we often get offered cake, don't we? Say, for example, at lots of these events. Now, I attended an event yesterday. There's other members there yesterday. We attended an event. I'm trying to give an example here. It was in St Wolfram's Church, and it was regarding the second Grantham Scout. Now, while we was there, we was offered hospitality cake. Okay. Now, we don't know if, for example, that the second Grantham Scouts are going to be putting in an application for a new scout hut. Okay, we don't know if they will or don't. I'm saying this is just. See, we've attended all sorts of events in the past, and we don't know whether the hospitality are going to be offering us cake, if you like. Okay.
Depends how many slices.
Yeah. So our point is this, Madam Chairman. My point is this. It's a serious point I'm making. I think, in my view, with regarding this, it says with regarding the code of conduct, I think that should be for a period of time, say for when we get our weekly list. Now, if we're offered hospitality from when we get the weekly list, I think then it comes into play.
Madam Chairman, in the other statutes, there are monetary limitations to this, but none of that will apply.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you know, if you're talking historical hospitalities, there's lots of places where we've been offered, some sort of.
Thank you. Is that all your questions?
No. So that's just one final point. But yeah, I do think it should come into play when we get that weekly list. You be careful what you accept from when an application's been submitted. I don't know what Emma's view on that. And my final point is, and it's been touched upon by Harish as well, with regarding the weighting of things. And I was particularly thinking about environmental issues. How do we weight such issues with an application? When you got massive wind turbine application, trees in particular, solar panels, that sort of thing. How do we actually weight something of that nature? Because I know we've got one particular application that will be coming before the committee to do with environmental issues, to do with trees.
Perhaps we shouldn't be talking about that here.
I haven't mentioned these in particular, but I'm just saying, when you do get such big application, how do you actually weight it is my question. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Anna Robertson, did you want to take a couple of points? Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
So a couple of those points seem like governance and code of conduct things. So I'll try and pick those ones up. And if you can answer the other ones, Emma, then that'll be really good. So yeah, in terms of declaration of gifts and hospitalities, they're right, there's a limit of £50. So anything that's worth more than that, you just need to declare it, irrespective of the timing. And it's about declaring it. It's not about, therefore you can't do anything, but you should declare it for that transparency to ensure that everybody knows that you have had that hospitality. It does beg me thinking, why would somebody give you a hospitality in advance of £50 in advance of a planning application, even if it is the Scouts? It seems a strange thing to do if they're not seeking to influence you in some way. The other point that I think is one for me is about leaving the room. And the reason for you leaving the room is not so that you don't see the debate. It's because as elected members, you're influential, and it's possible you can influence other members by your mere presence alone, particularly senior members, which most are on this committee. So you're members of long standing with good knowledge. Your very presence may influence others. So that's why you leave the room, not so you can't see the debate. You're quite right with that. I think those are my two. I think the rest might be Emma's, but if I've missed some.
Thank you. I think you can eat a lot of cake for £50. I think the overarching issue is it's about probity. It's actually about protecting you as councillors. It's not stopping you having the cake at the Scouts event or anything else. It's just about ensuring that your decision making is clear, transparent, and that there aren't probity issues. And if you're ever at all concerned, always go and have a conversation with the monitoring officer at any point, just to clarify, and you can declare it at the beginning of a meeting as well if you think that there's an issue. The site visits is an interesting one, and again, that's a probity issue. It's about ensuring that you've not been unduly influenced and you've not heard something or seen something as an individual that perhaps the rest of the councillors haven't seen, or officers. That's why you should have site visits with officers. We could perhaps have a rethink and see if we can do something differently in terms of your example of an open field where you're not, or you're viewing it alone from the public realm, and there may be a way around that where perhaps you still declare that you've done that, but leave that with us and we'll have a think and see whether we can tinker with that. But I would urge caution about visiting, certainly with developers, for example. Personally, the way I think that site visits should happen is that, yes, it's fine for the developer or the applicant to be there. You need the officer obviously there, but it's a fact-finding exercise for you as councillors. It's not there for the applicant or developer to put their points forward, and it's not there for the objectors to put their points forward. There's a difference between you asking for clarification, which window are you concerned about, versus allowing them to speak, because again, that's given them an opportunity to air their concerns or push their development on you, the pros and cons of it, that perhaps your fellow councillors have not heard. So it's a probity issue, and it's there to protect you as councillors and a planning committee. In terms of some of your other points, appeal costs, it's really difficult. I don't know yet whether or not we keep enough records so I can give you exact costs. But I can give you an example elsewhere with a member overturn. And not only did we have to pay for our own costs, our own barrister, the appellant's barrister and consultants' times, which was quite a lot. But as a result, the Section 106 that they were going to sign that had nearly £200,000 worth of contributions didn't get signed in the end. When they went to appeal, they said, I'm not signing it. So there was nearly £200,000 worth of lost community benefits that we didn't secure. So there are lots of knock-on effects. That is a bad example of costs, but you shouldn't be making decisions based on how much it's going to cost you because you've made the wrong decision. You should be aiming to make the right decision and hope that, that an inspector, even if the inspector disagrees with you, he doesn't find you unreasonable, because that's the test for costs. So site visits. You asked a question about non-material amendments and retrospective applications. So retrospective is after the event, obviously, as you know, and you see those, and we don't like to encourage them, but there's nothing we can do about it. Sometimes they come out of enforcement cases. The non-material amendments, there's minor material amendments and there's non-material minor amendments. So some are very, very small. So it might just be a case of, I couldn't get that brick anymore. Can I just change it to this subtly different brick? Or can I just move my window, half a metre along the same elevation? They're probably non-material minor amendments, and they come in. It's just a plan change. It's really simple. And as long as that's not caused any overlooking issues or anything like that, then we'll probably just approve those. They're quite quick and very simple. Non-material minor amendments are a bit bigger, but again, they shouldn't be material to the heart of the application. So they shouldn't be posing significant changes. And if it is a wholesale change or something, such as I don't want that condition anymore because I don't think that condition is reasonable, then we need to go back and revisit whether that condition was reasonable. And depending on how that condition got there in the first place and how controversial or significant the application was, will depend on the decision-making process. And it might be that you see some of those, they're called Section 73 applications, and other times you might not. But again, it depends on the nature of the application. Does that answer that point for you?
Yeah, just would we be advised as local councillors on those sort of applications coming in? And you spoke before about you possibly discuss with the councillors on whether an item goes to committee or not. So yeah, your advice on something like that going to committee, because we don't want to waste the committee's time on minor things like that going to committee. As I said, it's about finding the balance, isn't it, on what goes before committee and what doesn't. If that's
So they would appear on the weekly list, or should appear on the weekly list. And again, once we've been able to set up what Councillor Robbins has indicated about the individual consults on applications in your ward, you'd get notified on those in your ward. Feel free to email or pick up the phone if you want to quiz me or one of the team on a particular application. But again, if it's really controversial, if it's born out of an enforcement case, it's probably on my radar, or would be, and it certainly will be on your radar as well. So yes, we would have that discussion.
Thank you very much. Rosemary Cable-Brown, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's always something said for coming in last. It often has quite an impression. Oh, sorry, there's somebody else behind me. Beg your pardon. Right, what I would like to say is various things. First of all, this is a non-party committee. We've always said this, we stick by it. And so what I'm going to say is nothing to do with parties whatsoever, but it's to do with this report and Craters. Now, I'm going to refer here to our new executive member here, fairly new, I feel. Don't kid yourself, the public aren't up in arms about how much money we paid out to Craters. This was brought up with me only last night, and the person concerned in my ward had no idea this meeting was taking place today, or that I was going to be at it, because I don't discuss things. But she made it very obvious to me that, oh, well, the planning committee can spend all kind of money all on this, that, and the other, and all the rest of it. So I would like to know at some time, probably Nick can help me, why this went through, that we had to have a Craters report, or we had to particularly use this company without us having examples put towards presumably our finance company, I hope, of how much it could have cost for somebody less. The other thing, I'm going to say this to the chair, or to Nick, or to anybody else, surely to goodness, nobody expected this paper to go through carte blanche without us wanting to discuss all these different items. I've been reading this, believe it or not. It's very good stuff at night because it didn't send me to sleep, but it nearly did. But I was very, very interested in it, in every single point of it. But I wouldn't dream of voting for it without we'd gone through it, all of us together, on each or almost every individual item. I welcome our new legal representative for the planning committee, and I think she knows her stuff, and she's very good. Can I
just point you in the right direction there? She's not our legal advisor, she's our assistant director of planning.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm very, very sorry. Just put a new hat on then, and take a bow. Take a bow. Yes. Yeah, very, very sorry. But anyway, what I'm trying to say to you, you know your stuff. And you also know how to sell it. And I'm under no misapprehension of that at all. But what I'm going to say as well is that we are responsible to the residents of South Kesteven District Council. We're responsible as to what they have, what awful thing might be developed at the end of their road. And if we could put a stop to it, we should. And one of my first lessons I learned on this committee, and I'm thinking it must be about 12 years ago, it's a long while ago, was going to Stamford with the planning officer and looking at site visits, fair enough. But the one at the end of it all was very, very controversial. And do you know why it was controversial? It was because it had gone through without a site visit. An extension was built onto somebody's home next door to 3 other gardens. And that extension had gone up 3 blocks more than it should have done, or something like that. And the light had been taken off those gardens. One of the ladies in the gardens was suffering from polio or some such thing. She relied on her light, she relied on the sun, and it had gone. And nothing anyone could do about it because we didn't do it properly. Now, that was a very, very good learning curve to me. You're a planning committee, you're there for the good of all your residents, as the chairman's told me very often. It's not just the ward you represent, it's the whole of SKD, and she's quite right. But I went over there willing to learn, so pleased to be there. Oh, it's in Stamford and that. I love Stamford. And I couldn't believe that these 3 residents' gardens had lost the sun. So we had to be there at the right time of the day for when the sun came round, and it continued. So please, let's use some sense this afternoon. Let's decide we're going to go through this properly, decide which we will accept and which we won't. We've lost our money with Kratos. I think it is appalling. And I'm saying this basically that it's just common sense. Let's bring in these people that are supposed to give us all the information we need when we haven't probably done some of our in-depth study into who they are. I'm not saying they weren't any good. They probably were, probably top of their tree, or they think they are. But then they shouldn't have charged us so much. If they're so good, they could have got plenty of other business, so that we should have negotiated. I don't think anybody who's a contractor should be charging whatever the £1,000 it was. I'm not going to repeat it because it might not be right. But what I'm saying, Madam Chairman, is please, let's use our common sense this afternoon and do not pass this through en bloc. Let's have another meeting and another meeting and another meeting if need be. But we do need site visits. We cannot shrug our shoulders and say, oh, we don't need a site visit. When we have site visits, it doesn't always do us any good, does it? I mean, let's face it, that appalling decision that went through in my ward, 365 houses coming that we don't want. And what's more, we haven't got the road infrastructure for it. All the cars will be coming and going all over the place.
Can we?
And I've made my point. Thank you.
So no, thank you. Thank you for the comments, Councillor. I appreciate those. And noted, I mean, in terms of the first comments, other than noting your view on them, I'm not sure if there's a response particularly for me to come back with. What I would say only is that particularly the initial phase of the review, which is the first report, did involve quite a series of in-depth meetings and workshops with people. So it was quite an time-intensive piece of work. So rather than it was a fairly time-intensive piece of work to get to that point, which is what contributed to the cost of that. But I think certainly on the officer side, some of that work's been absolutely invaluable. And we've had some really positive feedback from officers recently, actually, around how, and also from committee members around how some of those relationships that some of the things that are identified in the report as things that we need to do differently, how they've had a positive impact and moved things in the right direction. And I do think, I do think those things are really important. And I have to say, Councillor Milnes has mentioned earlier on in the meeting about, and also to me privately around some real positive improvements in officer member working, which some of those things were just really identified and really helpful through that process, and wouldn't have been probably through some other way. But still note those concerns. In terms of site visits, I'll hand over to Emma if she wants to make specific comments around it. But I do think the onus really is around making. Is around the Assistant Director for Planning working alongside the committee, the chair and the vice chair to make sensible decisions around where those where the time of the committee is best invested, including on-site visits. And I think that's what the kind of emphasis of the report is. And I don't know if Emma, if you've got any other comments to add on to elaborate on that.
Only to say, other than I don't think the intention is to stop members from visiting sites in terms of site visits. I'll give it some thought. I think we're going to have a recess in a minute. I have got a couple of thoughts, and I'll perhaps discuss with Councillor Robbins and the chair a couple of thoughts, and we'll come back on that point.
Thank you. Can I go to Councillor Jackie Smith, please?
Yes, quite a lot of the points that have been, I would like to have made, have already been made. But I think we should think very carefully about site visits. I can remember fairly early in my time as a member of this committee that we had one or two problems in part of the district. And we decided that we ought really to perhaps to go and have a look. We hired a bus and went on a trip. It was open to not just committee members, but all of the councillors if they so wished. And there were quite a few people there who had never had any involvement at all with planning, and all that is incorporated in planning. And we had a very similar problem to the one that has just been outlined. A similar situation, a house that had been deprived of its sunlight. As we drove around in the bus, those people that had little or no idea of planning and so on were absolutely horrified when they saw the results of some of the decisions that had been made in their name. And thereafter, for a while, we did do some visits around, trying to look at different places, different events that had been done in our name. And in some cases, we had turned them down. In others, we had allowed them to go ahead. And this was quite an eye-opener for a number of people that of the councillors that had no thought at all but of planning, but they were encouraged to look at the forms that the paperwork that was sent out every so often. Their comment was, well, we get them, but we don't know what to do with them. We don't quite understand how you made that. It wasn't until they saw that house that they realised that they had learned quite a lot. And I think we, particularly at a time when we have a new intake after an election, that we need to think very carefully about the sort of planning we give, the sort of training we give, because it's all very well to say, oh, well, we'll send you a list on the green paper, as it used to be. But I think it's got to be a lot more than that, because over the years, people have said to me, well, I don't want to go on to the planning committee because I don't understand it. And I don't really know what it's all about. Now, that's not a good thing for people to be heard saying, oh, well, you know, who's overheard them? Oh, I don't know anything about it. I think we need to look carefully at that. And perhaps once a year, select a few places to go and have a look at some events that perhaps haven't turned out quite as either party thought they would. It is an eye-opener. And I think one of the things that came out from
Kratos, we did suggest, and when they came along and gave a talk to us on the results, they all said, we think that your idea of having visits out to have a look at the results of some of your works is a very good idea. And I think that's one of the things that I would say came well out of the expensive other thoughts. And I think we should really look at it and see what we can do and make it an annual event if necessary.
Thank you, Councillor Jackie Smith. I think we're going to do that 6 monthly, aren't we? Yeah, so yeah, it's been listened to.
Yeah, and a really good suggestion on your part at the time. I think it, you know, as I say, that's flowed through into every report that's gone since you made it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Judy Stevens.
I'm kind of gobsmacked you've asked me to speak now. It seems so long ago. Sorry. And so I've got, you know, so I've listened, and I started off when you just wanted to speak, when you said that apparently we call in 91% of applications as opposed to 96% in the rest of the country. I think, you know, we need to also have a look at how many applications that we're getting through, because now I can see that we get so many applications, particularly for Stamford, which for years and years we didn't get major developments in Stamford. And now all of a sudden we've got loads of them coming through. So of course they should be called in. But actually that kind of, really, I'm kind of come from this from a completely different point of view to this report. And so I feel at complete odds here, and I apologise for that. But first of all, we all know that there is I can't think of the words, but there is a presumption in favour of planning in this country. So that really we have to decide why something can't be built as opposed to that it should be. So that is first of all. So therefore the function of this committee is really important, because it is the only place that there can be any balance really given to for the general public to somehow address that presumption, because the officers are obviously working under the legal framework, which means they have to presume in favour of development. So already the man in the street is on the back foot. In other words, if he is against or wants to see an application changed in any way, he is already diminished in terms of what he can do, just by the very nature of the planning laws in this country, which we're not discussing now. But that makes the importance of this committee really more so, because that is the only way that the person in the street can have an impact. So our role is really very important. And so I think what we should be looking at, so where we should be coming from, in my view, this is where I'm probably totally at odds with you all, and I apologise, but I think we should be looking at how can we make this whole system much more effective for the person in the street to be able to put together, their views on with regard to a particular application. So I think I was having a conversation earlier today. In the past, used to have many more residents, for example, come to our parish council meetings with regard to planning applications. But I think over the years, people have come to realise that, the parish council puts in observations quite often, and quite often they're disregarded. And so people then become very disenchanted with the whole system. And I think there is a disenchantment with the system, generally speaking. And so people feel that they are disengaged and they're not enfranchised, they're not supported. And I welcomed, obviously, I'm more than happy to hear Councillor Wood's prowess discussed from the high. I'm so pleased that his, yes, I've had the conversation. It was marvellous that he had that discussion with those developers. It was marvellous that he had those discussions, with people in Long Bennington, and came to that conclusion. But not all councillors would have done that. So what happens in the case where, that didn't happen? We're trying to address those cases, the ones that fall through the net. And to be fair to this committee, and I've been on it not for long now, but I was before. And in the past, I think under Martin Wilkins, we often discussed, and we discussed with Sylvia Bland, who was a previous incumbent, about having, looks at what we'd done before, what applications have been passed in the past, and how they could have been improved. We did look at that, and we haven't ever done that. And so I think that's definite, absolutely. The other thing on site visits is quite often, I don't know, it's kind of very prescriptive about what you should and shouldn't do on a site visit. I think we're just all, tin hat and straitjacket and say, not, possibly mask, say nothing. But in the past, when we've gone on site visits, there have been conversations between the officer and members. For example, I can think of many occasions actually, but one I can think of was the cycle path in Lynchfield Road with the recent development that's going up there, where we said, look, this could, wouldn't this be better here? And actually then that was resolved prior then to the meeting. It came in as a reserved matter, as a late paper, and it was all put through at that time. So I think site visits can be really useful from that point of view, because you're on the spot, you're looking at it, and you can have the conversation. So I would hate for that to be diminished in any way. I think that's really important. What else was there? Oh, and as for reports, I mean, until recently, I had no sort of feelings about reports at all. But I've recently come across 2 of them, and I would say definitely we've definitely got the expertise in-house where we can sit down round a table and thresh a lot of these things out ourselves in a consensual way, which is team building and preferable to having a report compiled by somebody who only knows, frankly, half the picture, and then comes back with something that all members don't actually consider is relevant. So, I'm sorry, I'm coming up from this from a different point of view, I think. So I apologise for that, but there we are. So.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Emma, would you like to? But regarding training, that's something we want to look at, is the training, definitely. And it is very hard. I mean, poor old Sam, she puts out invitations to us for numerous training, not just this committee, but for other committees and the council in general. And the uptake is so poor, she has to cancel.
On that note, a lot of us actually have to try and run a business or work, as well as do this. So quite often things are happening during the day.
We should just put some on in the evening.
On the whole, things are happening in the day, which make it very difficult for people.
Yeah, we need to get the training in the evening and during the day so everybody can attend.
Discussed in the past on training, and I know this isn't about training, but we have discussed having a lot of training on a Saturday, for example, so that you can get through quite a number of different things in a day when people can all make it. Otherwise, there is a bit of a deficit of democracy if we're only expecting people that can come in the day to come to meetings, because you can't come if you're working. That's the problem.
Thank you. I'll certainly be looking at the training. I think that there needs to be more than just the annual training, some kind of bite size into different topic areas, whether that's trees, legal matters, Section 186, heritage, you name it, there's an awful lot. As planning officers, I have to do training every day. Every day is a school day. So, absolutely we'll look at that. Can I just pick you up on something that you said in terms of the presumption in favour of sustainable development? I think were the words you were trying to grapple with. Officers and the planning committee are legally required to determine applications in the same way under the same legislative framework. It is wrong to say that officers are bound by that test, but councillors are not when it comes to planning committee. You can balance it and come out, A plus B equals C, and I could come out and say A plus B equals D. We can come out with different answers, but you are charged with exactly the same test to determine in accordance with development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So we are bound by the same restrictions.
That harm thing, how much harm is that likely to do? That has come up, I've seen in appeals, for example. So there's got to be some kind of measure of that. And of course, it's not always possible for an officer who is I'm just trying to see the committee as a conduit to allow members of the public to be able to voice, I don't think there's enough of that, enough of people being able to feel that they're part of the process. And frankly, say, but I don't think people would mind how long they have to sit and wait, so long as they feel that in the end that their application has been properly discussed and has the opportunity to be discussed. And there are loads of things that come to this committee, which on the surface of it, you probably wouldn't bring to the committee. But as Councillor Morgan pointed out earlier on, sometimes you can put a little condition on, for example, with regard to a hedgerow or a fence or a tree that has been overlooked, and it can come out of a discussion, and that can be quite important to an application, actually. So, it might only be a small thing, but sometimes it's the small things that make the big difference.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood. You're talking about the judgment and therefore the weight to the balance. So that's absolutely fine. Engagement with the public is always a challenge, and I completely understand that sometimes they feel completely disenfranchised from the process. It might be that we need to do more with the parish councils in particular, particularly if we get bigger schemes that come in, so we can have briefings for all councillors as well on some of the bigger applications. That's something that I've done elsewhere, so that you've got the chance to quiz developers, not predetermined obviously, but ask questions factual. But if it's open to all councillors, you're running less risk of any sort of probity issues. There's lots of work we can do around sort of engagement in that sort of sense. They absolutely should not feel that they're not listened to, because the officers, if they're raising concerns, should be addressing those through the reports. And if they're not, then that's something that needs to be particularly addressed in that sort of sense. But they shouldn't feel ever that they're not listened to. But that doesn't mean we're going to agree with what they're saying, because you do unfortunately get a lot of people that are just saying, no, never ever accepting that development in my backyard. That's just not happening here. And unfortunately, that isn't. We may not agree, because you've got to find sound planning reasons. The committee's role is not necessarily to overturn decisions, but it is to properly assess and to look at decisions. If you come to a different balance and a different conclusion, then that's fine, that's okay. I think I've probably picked everything I wanted to pick up. We've talked a lot about site visits anyway. But yeah, it's a collaborative approach, and engagement, I think, is the key point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, hang on a minute.
Thank you.
Hang on a minute, because after Councillor Baxter, we will go for a comfort break.
Yeah. Yeah, the advantage of going last is that everybody's desperate for a comfort break, I think. So I think consultants are not all bad. He said, speaking as a would-be consultant. But this, for clarity, this consultant has been paid £40,000 or more, and some of the information in the report, I think if we'd done our homework properly, we probably could have come up with some of the recommendations by ourselves if we'd had a kind of frank internal inquiry. Now, I don't think anybody on this committee, which I'm a substitute to this committee, nobody wants to start at 1 o'clock and then carry on till 8 o'clock in the evening. And we agree that decisions made at 7:30 on a Tuesday night are not always as thorough as the decisions which are made at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So, yeah, I'm not saying it's not broke. However, in terms of first of all, going through the site visits, I don't see how you can stop us visiting a site from the outside. There is an advantage to walking onto the site and to having the developer to hand, but we've got Google Maps and we've got Street View, and most of us have got access to a car. And so if there is a particular site that we want to go and have a look at, chances are that some of us would use our initiative. So in some ways, it's better to organise a meeting so that we can do it properly. And not everybody goes on the site meetings anyway. So where you've got a committee where two or three people went on the site meeting and the rest of them don't, that can lead to confusion or imbalance. And I don't know what the solution is, because certainly we don't all want to have to go to Fulbeck or to Deeping St James before every meeting. So that's site visits. In terms of what's on the committees, everybody is talking about how there seems to be a problem with calling. I think this is a solution in search of a problem, because I've gone through the committee reports for the last year while you've been talking. I've been paying attention, and 14, we've got 56 councillors, 14 people have called in a decision over the last year. And of those, I think only 2 have called in more than 2, and only 3 have called in more than 1. So it's something that we use as councillors to call in a decision when we have to, or rather when the community says that we ought to. If I feel lobbied by a town or a parish council in my ward to say there's an issue, then I should be able to call it in. So going through the previous reports, it's an average of about 1 per meeting, maybe even less than 1 member call in per meeting. I think that figure would be higher if we weren't calling in every major development. And the reason we're calling in every major development is because of a particular situation that meant that we needed to be more careful, and perhaps with hindsight that could have been dealt with in a different way. Certainly if that particular decision had been called in the first place, we wouldn't be here, but it wasn't, and so now we have every major decision. So I think there is something to look at in terms of the major decisions which are called before this committee. If it's a stable in an empty field, then yeah, maybe we should have a separate definition of what gets called in rather than the statutory definition of a major development. In terms of the call-ins which are contentious and controversial, yeah, I think pretty much we know our own wards and we know which ones people are jumping up and down about and which ones they want called in. And sometimes it's called in on both sides. The person who wants the application to go through wants it called in, and the person who's against it wants to get it called in. And we as district councillors get caught in the middle because we don't need to take a side. What we need to do is to make sure that everybody has their opportunity to see democracy in action, and if necessary to have their day in court, and to be able to see how the process works, which with the best will in the world, when officers make decisions, it's not as open and transparent as some people would like. Some people like coming to the chamber and seeing what the discussion is about. So that's all fine. The question of whether we should be able to call in things which are not in our ward, I think again is a solution in search of a problem. I only can remember 1 time when that's happened, and I remember it because it was me that did it, and it was the application by Grantham Community Heritage Association for the installation of a statue and a plinth on St Peter's Hill. And I don't think anyone could argue that wasn't contentious. In the end, I think it went through unanimously, but the world's media were there. So that I don't regret calling in that decision outside my ward for 1 minute, because it should have been called in by the ward member. Okay, do beg your pardon. Yeah, so it would have been called in had it not been anyway. But I think if I spot an issue of interest, and Councillor Robbins mentioned if we've got a particular specialty or a particular background that means we know something about clay pigeon shooting or environmental issues or shoe shops or whatever, then there's a fox hunting. Then there's a reason why we might want to be able to call in something, because the local members either aren't aware of the issue or are under pressure not to. So I think if you kicked out that bit of the paper, then I'd go home much happier saying nobody does it anyway. It doesn't need to be the ward or the adjoining ward. It seriously isn't a problem. It's only happened, I think, once in 3 years. Finally, I've got written down rules. Oh yeah, the rules on page, I think it's appendix 2 or annex 2 and page 4. The page which on my document starts off, should not express opinion on the development. Are we all on the same page? I think it's page 4. And it says at the top of the page, should not express opinion on the development.
It's big page 13. It starts off lobbying, where members of the committee may be lobbied in their representation role. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking on
And
the
then
website.
it carries on.
Yeah.
Over to the next page.
So, well, I've got a different sheet. I'm online, and so I can't see what. I'm just going from what's on the website and the public meeting.
On the major one, it's page 13, and it starts. The heading is lobbying.
Okay.
Everybody happy?
Right. So if you go down that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but the 6th paragraph down, and I think I don't know if you've all got labels on your. If you've got numbers, that would be helpful. I haven't on the website. It says, whilst a member can speak on behalf of a body of opinion, they should not personally be involved in organising support for or against that opinion. It's not clear from reading this whether that means a member of a committee or a member of the council, because if a member of the council is the representative for the New War Memorial for Corby Glen Society, then surely they should be allowed to speak to the committee, even if they've been involved in the Corby Glen Society, whatever. So I don't understand that. And the one next to it doesn't make English at all. Members not serving on the planning committee may speak to the committee in accordance with standing orders, however, should not be deferred to by the committee. That's not a sentence. So there's several bits in here like this. And while you can clarify what you meant to say, perhaps we should be doing that within the text before we take this any further. I've not gone through every bit in detail because the bit that I'm most interested in is the call-in. It's the call-in, I think, which is contentious. It's a call-in, it's for changes to the call-in that I have a problem with. And the original changes to the call-in were far more draconian than is actually got to this stage. So thanks to the meetings with the private meetings elsewhere, where we were going to say, if you call it in, then you waive your right to speak, or if you call it in, you are deemed to have been supportive, or sorry, you're objecting to it. I'm glad that's all been thrown out because that was no good at all. But yeah, so at the moment, it's just this non-ward thing. Sorry if I've gone on, and look forward to the comfort break. Thanks.
Thank you. I will let you know when we get back after our break. Okay. Hang on, before you go, Mr. Dilks, perhaps we would like the answers, especially Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. In terms of site visits, I've said it previously, it's not about stopping you going on a site visit. It should be about making sure that you are protected, there's no probity issues, etc., etc. So that's why we need some guidance notes in there and some rules around site visits and how they're organised. In terms of call-ins, again, it's not about preventing members from calling in, it's about giving you the choice and the right to say, actually, this is an application you need to call in. So it's
Sorry, Chair, if that's the situation at the moment, we can all call in anything across the district, and generally speaking, we don't abuse the rule. So the rules don't need changing. And the rules which are set forward in this document say, actually, we are going to restrict what you can call in. And I think how, but.
Okay, so the restriction that's checked, as you put it, that is proposed is around which members can call it in. So I'm assuming that's the issue that you have, not, okay, that's understood. In terms of definitions of majors, yes, you could look at putting in a definition of a major. So instead of saying all majors as defined by the Act, you could say all applications over 500 houses, 300 houses, you know, there are different thresholds that the committee could decide it wishes to have a look at if you wanted extra levels in there. In terms of lobbying, my understanding, and excuse me, I didn't draft these particular points, But it's about, it should be the committee members shouldn't be involved, because if they're involved in a body that is pro or so if they're particularly supportive and vocal about a scheme, or they're in opposition to a scheme, then they've predetermined that application. So that's the issue there. Doesn't mean that your fellow ward councillors, because obviously I think there's 3 in every ward here. So, no,
and that's the issue.
you've only got 1. Okay. Well, that's not for the planning committee, but it's your other councillors can obviously play a slightly different role if they're not sat on the planning committee. And then in terms of speaking in the committee, the way that I would have assumed it should be working, and it's how I've worked before, is that other councillors can come and address the committee at the chairman's discretion. In reality, that's a given that it will happen, which is that we need notice. And yeah, absolutely. So it's just clarifying that rule. It's not necessarily changing that rule. It's just clarifying that other councillors can come and address the committee. I don't know if colleagues want to say anything about the specific wording.
Are you saying that members of the committee can't, should it be appropriate in their ward, for example, to address the committee? At the moment, you could say, right, I'm predetermined on this particular matter. It's of such great interest to my residents, therefore I'll step down from the committee and I will speak instead of taking part in the committee. Are you saying we can? Are we saying we can still do that, or we can't do that in future?
So I'm not entirely sure I've quite followed that. So as a member of the planning committee, you need to be very careful about predetermining applications. Therefore, if you are a member of an opposition of a group which is opposing a particular development or supporting, and you're vocally or clearly part of that organisation, you are predetermined and you should not take part in that debate and that vote. If you do not feel that you can impartially, on planning merits and planning grounds, take a decision, and you wish to, instead of playing that role on the planning committee, say, actually, I hate this scheme, it's not going to be approved, I'm never ever going to approve it, then that's a matter for you to discuss with the monitoring officer. You're probably predetermined, you should step back from the planning committee in terms of taking a vote. And yes, at the chairman's discretion, you could still come and voice your opinions to the planning committee, but you cannot take part of the debate.
As any other member has.
Excuse me, can we just address it through the chair? Thank you, instead of being a rabble. Thank you. Councillor Milnes.
Yes, I was going to pick up on that, because is it a right or isn't it a right for a ward councillor to be able to speak, whether or not they've sat off the committee to speak, or whether they're coming as just a ward councillor, and similarly for a parish council to be able to speak, rather than at the chair or your discretion, because that worries me.
Thank you. I'll go to Alan Robinson for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think there's any plan to change the current arrangements whereby ward members can speak at planning committee. Well, that's not the intent. That's not the intention, Councillor Dilks, as far as I can see from the thing before me. So it shouldn't be at the.
Sorry, page 14, halfway down, the paragraph that Ashley Baxter just alluded to, the last sentence is, the chair will decide when non-committee members may speak. That is a change, right? At the moment, ward members have a right to come to the planning committee, and we can, if we're members of the planning committee, step down as members of the planning committee, not take part in the, but come and lobby the committee and have 5 minutes as a ward councillor. We're allowed to do that at the moment. Can I also just, Emma, I appreciate you knew and all that, but we are not all 3-seat wards. We are 1, 2 and 3-seat wards. Now, the problem is with calling, what we are saying, and what really worries me today, and I really welcome some of the things that you said that you're prepared to go and have a look at, but the one that really worries me is what you said, that all major applications except council applications will need a call-in. There's going to be more call-ins, not less. There's going to be more, not fewer. And so but what I'm saying is we're relying on, if you want me to shut up, I'll shut up. But
thank you.
Okay, well, can I come back after the break,
Later.
please?
Yes.
Thanks.
But I would just like to go to Alan Robinson, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So in my view, and I think we need to clarify the report, that there's a difference between a ward member speaking at the planning committee and a non-member of the committee who isn't the ward member for that application. Now, if we need to be clearer about that in the report, that's fine. But I hadn't seen any intention to prevent ward members from speaking, Councillor Dilk. So if it's not clear, then of course it obviously isn't, because everybody's read it in a different way. We need to we need to clarify that, don't we? So we can do that. But you can stand down from the committee and be a ward councillor as long as you don't take part in the debate afterwards or vote. Equally, if you're not a member of the planning committee, but you are a ward councillor for the application under dispute, you should be allowed, will be allowed to speak on that matter as a ward member. Now, if it's not clear in the papers, we can make those amendments. That's really useful feedback that you've all got. It hasn't come across properly, so we can make those changes and make that clear.
Can I just point out, perhaps the way I read that bit is at the chairman's discretion is whether you can ask that non-committee member a question. That would be at my discretion. Am I correct in the reading of that?
I think we're talking about numbers 37 and 38 when it's ward members speaking or parish council speaking. And I had a little note here, is it not a right? So I obviously read it that it was discretionary and not a right. So that probably just needs clarifying. If we're saying they have a right, it's fine.
Sorry, is that the last paragraph where it says the parish or town council has the right to be consulted and should not automatically be referred to in a decision? That's because it says,
there was somewhere where it cast doubt also on whether the parish council's right to speak at committee was a discretionary decision or not.
That's fine. I think it's already been said, we'll have to look at the wording around that. It's certainly not my intention that the parish council doesn't have a right to speak at the planning committee. That would be covered by the public speaking rules, so that you invite your parishes, town councils, your objectors, and in accordance with those rules, they would be able to address the planning committee. What this paragraph, and again, maybe it's not clear, we cannot as a council delegate our decision-making powers to the parish council. It doesn't mean we shouldn't consult with them. I think that's what it's trying to say, but let's look at the wording and
Thank you. Thank you for all your questions. I think we've all deserved a break.
Madam
So
Chair.
could I ask you come back at 4:05?
Madam Chair, unfortunately, I can't stop beyond the corporate break. So can I just take this opportunity to say thank you very much indeed to all our officers and to yourself.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you.